Okay, welcome back. Hope everyone had a great fall break. Did everyone get plenty of good rest? I hope some chill time, maybe some. What's someone tell me? And this always happens in every class. There's like a few people you know who you are that always like to answer me. Um, Someone that's not those people. Again, you know who you are. What's a game you played over fall break? Anyone that doesn't normally answer me. Yeah. Metroid Dread. Yes, that looks super good. Have you been enjoying it? Yeah, I've been hearing all the good things. It's totally a game I would go and get. Yeah, Spider-Man on PS5, cool. That's another good one. Except I'm tapped out on my game budget between buying a PS5 and buying like a couple of games for it, which were Deathloop and Final Fantasy VII Intergrade. I know that at I know at that table there's some issues that you have with that game. I want to try it. Yeah, Metroid Dread is gonna just have to be on the back burner, but I kind of regret it because I'm hearing like just tons of amazing remarks. Have you gotten through the whole game yet? Yeah, I've been hearing that it's, and this is not a bad thing. I've been hearing that it is not super long. Um, I'm not sure what that means today. Like I personally really like the 20-hour length at my level of time I have to game, but I still regularly play 7,500-hour JRPGs. It just takes me like 2 years, right, to get through them. Any other games? Yeah, Peter. Yeah, the Castlevania. Those are the Game Boy Advance Castlevanias, right? And does it include any of the like? I think there's some DS Castlevanias, or is it only Advance Game Boy Advance? Okay, and in the Rondo of Blood, I think that's like basically the Super Nintendo Rondo of Blood, isn't it? Which is unfortunately the vastly inferior Rondo of Blood compared to the TurboGrafx, the Turbo CD one. So, but the rest of those games are super rad. How's that been going? Okay, for Aria of Sorrow, yeah. So, by the way, for those of you who don't know, there's like in terms of Castlevania games, of course, it's up for debate. By the way, I'm going into this because the Bioshock lecture I'm about to do had tons of internal videos, so it's still finishing downloading. Um, so this is up for debate, but generally, when people think about best Castlevania games of all time, Symphony of the Night, of course, everyone knows that one, or you should know it. But the other one, Dracula X, aka Rondo of Blood, and for a long time, it was like super hard to get. You had to spend, like $500 on eBay or something because it was like a turbo CD game or something like that. Some obscure system, that wasn't popular. There was a Super Nintendo port. That's what's on that collection. It approximates Rondo of Blood, but it's not quite the same game. But you can get it now on, I think, on PS4, right? I think on PS4 you can buy like a Symphony of the Night, Dracula X, Rondo of Blood, same thing. You can buy it on PS4 now, I think, and definitely do that because it's a really cool. Like how uh, Symphony of the Night's the Metroidvania thing, right? Like how Rondo of Blood works is it's a weird but really cool kind of in between kind of stage of evolution between old Castlevania, which is linear, whip your way through, from left to right, to the kind of really open, sort of exploring of hub and unlocking things, Symphony of the Night version. Rondo of Blood is like in between that, and it's in between in that they're starting to experiment with those ideas. They have like branching paths, for instance. It's like you fall down a pit, and instead of going to your death, you end up in just a completely new area, and now the path for you is forked. The other thing about it that's really cool is like there's like other characters. This is something that they kind of advanced forward from Castlevania 3 on the NES, where there's like different characters you can play as that completely change the how the game plays. So super cool game. Okay, so I think it's downloaded now, so we can get started on today's lecture. So we're going to be talking about the original Bioshock, not the one I worked on, Bioshock Infinite, but the original game. And the reason we're talking about it is, first of all, you're still kind of wrapping up or basically done with the immersive sim project, and so we're still kind of at the end of that. But there is some combat scripting stuff in here, which will tie into your next assignment, and also, as a level design course, these games have just tons and tons of great level design, so they're really worth talking about, just in general as well. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, key facts. So 2007. So gosh, that would be, let's see, 10, 13, 14, 15 years ago. Right? Yes, 14 years ago. Soon to be 15. So, already got some age. Spiritual successor to the System Shock series, right? So, Bioshock wasn't. That's why it's called that, because they're sort of playing on this IP that already existed. Many people at Irrational Games have worked on the System Shock games. So this is really, they're building off of a legacy. And it's considered a key game in the immersive sim genre. Boy, it seems warm in here. I have to say, it seems a little warm in here. I'm going to do this because, yeah, air conditioning. It's like in that weird stage right now in the buildings where it's cool enough, but like where they're shutting down AC, but it still gets stuffy in the morning. It's kind of a weird time. All right. So let's talk about what immersive sims are. And by the way, as a side note, I was talking to Brantley yesterday. I feel like in the future, I'm probably going to rename those assignments, because immersive sims have so many deeply embedded systems that you're just never going to be able to make in like a 3-4 week cycle. Probably what you're doing, it has immersive sim elements, but it's more like scripted adventures or open-ended adventure is almost kind of what I would maybe rename that assignment in the future. So anyway, immersive sims focus on player choice, being able to allow the player to approach gameplay from a bunch of different angles, right? Giving the player that ability. Now, you might think, well, what makes this different from like open world games? Because open world games are like this. I think the Venn diagram, there'd be tons of overlap, right? And these are very fuzzy terms. We talk about immersive sims versus open world versus RPGs. There's a lot of Venn diagram overlaps here with these elements. But I would say the main thing that makes an immersive sim game different than open world is it's much tighter. Okay, like when you play an open world game and you get lost doing side quests for sometimes you could for like 100 hours you can get just lost in side quests. That doesn't really happen much in immersive sim games because they're not nearly as big. There's not you're generally still following a fairly linear thread or story. It's just that the gameplay along the way is open-ended, right? It's kind of a tight experience with open-ended gameplay. I think that's probably the best explanation I can give in terms of what makes it different. But immersive sims, they do grab a lot of different elements from other genres, which is why there's just like tons and tons of overlap here. So it's very common for them to be in first person and to have a first person shooter element. And I think it goes back to the earliest designers, people like Warren Spector with Deus Ex and things like this. Doug Church is another designer. That was the original System Shock. These people were like really influenced by dungeon crawlers that were in first person, right? So you're seeing this long legacy build up to this. So now, there's no reason why you can't do an immersive sim in third person. No reason. It's just typically done in first person. And I do think it does help the immersion aspect of it as well. Lots of RPG elements, and that should be of no surprise because, again, the legacy of these games go back to like early 90s first person RPG dungeon crawlers, right? So, these games tend to have things like they can have leveling up, although Bioshock, there isn't leveling up in that RPG way. There is character persistence. Stats, inventory, you loot things. There's very much a dungeon crawling loot feel when you play these because you're rifling through every desk and wastebasket to find a half-eaten sandwich to increase your health or whatever. So definitely a lot of RPG elements. And a lot of these games have, although they don't have to have, there's definitely a survival horror influence here as well. And again, that I think was innovated first in the System Shock games, which were like a sci-fi horror sort of theme, going into the Bioshock series as well. So they have a lot of these sorts of elements. All right, so before we get into some level design topics, let's talk about some of the high level stuff. It's kind of the overall game design of the original Bioshock. Now, quick caveat, I played through most of the game like way back, like, you know, when it came out. And then preparing this lecture, I played through the first like 3 hours or so. So that always makes me a little nervous because sometimes games can change quite a bit, but that's okay. I would love to follow this up with like a end game discussion someday. But some of these things I think are pretty safe assumptions to make, especially because they have to do with how you introduce mechanics. But just giving you that caveat, right? So the game does a fantastic job at the gentle introductions of systems. And we talk in game design a lot about, well, when you introduce a new thing, you kind of give it to the player in a safe place and you kind of allow them to use that ability in kind of a consequence-free environment at first. All those really classic game design things, they do so well here, right? Because you do have a lot of abilities, especially the plasmids, and they always give you like a cool way to use it. Like it's not in any of these. This was like cutting room floor stuff. It didn't make it into the lecture, but there's a video I took of the telekinesis power where they set up a little like tennis ball shooting machine, and you get that power, and then you can immediately play around with like catching tennis balls in midair and throwing them back, right? Like they just give you fun, cool ways to use these powers, and then you immediately get to employ them in real gameplay. So they do such a good job. And then, and this is very much an immersive sim thing, is the combination of systems, right? So you get something, and then you learn right away you can use it with other things to kind of create sort of these compound effects. And this happens right away at the shock plasmid. You get the shock plasmid, and then you're immediately taught that you can stun an enemy and then whack him over the head with a wrench, right? So you're combining your shock power and melee. And you learn right away too that you can also shock water, and if they're standing in water, it will hit them. So that's very much an immersive sim thing. Hey, you can combine systems and play around with them. So let's take a look at this as we delve into the old ultra violence that these games often like to have. Yep, looting a corpse. That's definitely an RPG element. Yes, you are. Bye bye. All right, so that's an example of that. By the way, one of the things that they do really well, those little vocal clips in this game. I'm not a bad person when they're about to like murderize you, right? Like these people, if you don't know the lore of the game, they've been driven insane by basically genetically modifying themselves constantly, right? So they're completely out of their mind, and they'll like shout these almost non sequitur things at you. Really effective at creating the feeling of unease that you have thematically throughout the game. Okay, so more talk about the overall game design. The game, and this is really important, I think, because even though this is, I think, a game design thing, I think it's also a level design thing. It's something we've commented to you about in your projects. They really try hard to make sure you know what you're doing all the time, right? Like even in that clip, like they have Atlas yelling at you, "Remember the 1-2 punch, do the thing," right? You can tell that they spent a lot of time and effort making sure players weren't confused, and that's really important, right? So you get objective messages. There's always a hint available if you forget about what you're doing. They have a compass pointing you which way to go. So you know they do a really good job of that, and that's something that a lot of that is just really simple scripting that you can all do. So definitely something within your kind of realm to be able to make happen even in your projects. And I also really like how they use kind of the overall goals of the game. They make sure the player has a really simple goal they understand, but then they frustrate that goal, right? And that's what creates the length in the game scenarios. So kind of the abstraction I make about this is often you get, okay, go here, do this thing, right? In the beginning of the game, it's like, go find the sub to escape. And what's kind of cool is it's like, you should just be able to do that immediately, right? You should just be able to like leave right away, except that, oh, that door's blocked. Oops. So you have a goal, you go to that goal, but whoops, now you have to go do something else, right? So can't go here, that's blocked. You need the special thingy. Then you go get the special thingy, but whoops, the special thingy is blocked by a boss or something. So you have to go beat the boss and then get the special thingy, and then you can use the special thingy to unblock your path, right? The game is really good at doing this, like setting kind of this high level goal that you have to follow, and then kind of frustrating it along the way, making you do all this other stuff. And this happens a lot in conventional action games, but it's just simpler, right? It just usually involves less steps. When you think about when we talked about World War Z earlier in this semester, they do things like that, but it's usually just go into another room and flip some switches or something. So in a game like this, it's the same kind of idea of give goal, then frustrate goal with different sort of subtasks, but they're just more involved because it's, slower paced game. And this is an example of the kind of thing I'm talking about here. If you look at this objective message here, it says the emergency access bathysphere, which is what you need to use to get to the sub, can only be reached with a special key. Oh no, that's one of the ways they frustrate your goal. But it's Dr. Steinman has the key. So now you see, you were going to go to the thing. The thing was locked. Oh, whoops, can't actually get in the thing. You have to go find this person to get the key. But then even when you go try to find the person, that goal is frustrated by various things that we'll talk about later. So again, set easy to understand goal, so you kind of know what the overall objective is, but then just throw a bunch of roadblocks at the player to make them do a bunch of stuff to make that goal happen. One of the things about the combat of the game is, and this is one of the big differences I noticed between this and Bioshock Infinite that I worked on, is that this game really tries to use the environment to make the combat a little more interesting than it would be otherwise. It doesn't, at least in the early game, do these kind of big pitched battle shooting gallery things where you're kind of in one encounter area, just kind of plugging away. There is one spot that does that a little bit that we'll talk about because it's got some really good kind of classic combat scripting design. But for the most part, it's, a few enemies at a time that are just there in the level. And they'll do lots of little tricks to make that seem interesting because these are fairly simple enemies. I mean, there's usually enemy that runs at you with wrench or enemy that shoots, or maybe, you do get enemies that start to throw bombs at you and stuff, but they seem like fairly simple AIs. So they're utilizing a lot of environmental tricks to make things seem interesting. You do get a lot of surprise encounters, open a door, ooh, there's an enemy. They love to turn the lights out on you, where you go into an area, the lights turn black. And so all of a sudden, even one enemy becomes quite dangerous. And as far as getting into the level design now, this game utilizes a certain type of hub and spokes, right? Now, the difference between the hub and spokes that's used in Bioshock and the way I would give if I was doing a whole lecture on hub and spokes is that you don't necessarily see in this map like a super obvious hub, right? So they're sort of abstracting the hub of the hub and spokes. You don't literally see like a big room with like spokes going off of it or whatever, but it is definitely got hub and spokes elements because it's these areas with lots of locked doors and blocked areas that you have to acquire new abilities or items to get through. And so the spokes are definitely there, and you definitely get that feeling of the environment kind of opening up very slowly. And by the way, it's kind of unfortunately hard to see because they don't show you until you fill in the map that there's staircases here. But I do love how they do the map drawing. If you see these kind of red arrows, these are staircases. I don't know why they don't put them on the map until you fill it in. But at the end of the arrow, it's a staircase. And so what they're doing is like this chunk is the upstairs part of this chunk. And that's kind of a nice way to illustrate that, right? So they So you have like the upstairs part, and they're just drawing it as a separate map, but they're showing you with these arrows the stairs that lead to it. Okay, so that's what these arrows are. Same idea here. Like this chunk here is like the upstairs chunk of this. So that's actually pretty nice. I thought that was a pretty nice way to kind of have multiple levels on one map that you can read pretty easily, without having to do like a Metroid Prime style like 3D map that you rotate around and get confused by. Um, Okay, so this is one of the kind of hub and spokes elements, and also goes back to the frustrating players along the way. Give them this clear goal, but then give them a bunch of roadblocks. So this is an area you cannot get through until you get the incinerate plasmid, because you have to melt all that ice. It also is cool because it teaches you that, hey, like this is yet another environmental interaction with the systems, right? That if you see ice anywhere else, you could probably melt it with the incinerate plasmid. Okay, another thing about the world design, and I think this is very much a thing that you see in immersive sim games in particular, in terms of how the world works, is the responsiveness. Now, this is one of those things that you might say, oh, well, it's not a big deal, except even now, games don't actually do this all that often. And what's really great about it is any of you can do this, because it's just a toggle on an object in Unreal to make it a physics object. But look at, as you traverse around, how many things respond to you. Have to refill, that atom or whatever. My gun is not loaded, and this is also, I'm not quite used to PC controls. I'm like, how do I switch again? Ah, yes. Oh, better duck. There we go. All right. So anyway, like most of the objects that are small are actually physics objects. So like almost everything in the world kind of moves, responds to your input. And again, that's like a small thing, but I don't think that's actually something that's all that common in games even now. Like most game props are just kind of like, permanently anchored in the world. Like it could just be a flimsy chair and you hit it and it just doesn't move at all, right? And in these immersive sim games, they generally try hard to make things very responsive in this way. And I think that is a cool part of the world design. And you do have, with the telekinesis ability, you can actually pick things up and throw them and do damage to enemies. So there is actual gameplay that these loose objects can support. And again, in Unreal, like any object can become a physics object just by clicking some checkboxes in the details panel. So this is one of those things where they are, this is an easy thing to emulate in your own games. And by the way, I haven't mentioned this yet, but of course the BioShock games are Unreal Engine games, so it should be not surprising that a lot of the things they do you can also do, because it's same technology. So yeah, like I said, wonderful use of physics, and this is combined with a lot of interactable objects. Now, this is different than the kind of interactions that we saw in Resident Evil. That really, a lot of it is just like text. You go up to a picture, press a button. Oh, hey, it's a picture, right? There's not as much of that in Bioshock, but there are a lot of like lootable things, and there's the vending machines that are placed everywhere. By the way, vending machines that dispense powers, ammo, weapons, all kinds of things. That is another massive immersive sim thing that you see often in those games. I'm playing Deathloop right now, and it's got vending machines, right? It's got physics objects. It's very much a game in this family, in this genre. Okay, so one of the things that really struck me about playing this again after so many years is the sort of cliches that almost get laughed at by level designers now. They really started here, and here's the thing: they work really darn well, right? I mean, that's why they've become things that everyone has done a lot, because wow, they're effective, right? And so we talk about mise en scène, which is environmental storytelling, basically. This game is like the masterclass of mise en scène. I mean, you just see it everywhere. Um, and actually, one of the Ken Levine quotes about this, and he's talking about Steinman, which is sort of the first boss. When it came to characters like the scientist Steinman, through his scrawlings and his rantings and what he did to people, by the time you met him, he's just some AI running around with a machine gun. So, what the mise en scène does is it kind of allows us to cheat a little bit, right? Like you have this awesome buildup, but it really is just another enemy that you just gun down. It might be a little stronger, a little tougher, but all the mise en scène just helps build this thing up, and it builds it up without taking you out of the game. I think that's another thing that it's easy to forget now, that Bioshock was really trying hard to do. And this explains the audio logs, which I don't think I have in the slides. So let me get this across to you now, because that's the other big cliche that immersive sims have is the use of audio logs. Well, why did they do that? Why did they do all the mise en scène and the audio logs? Well, they were really trying hard to pack as much storytelling in without using cutscenes. That was super important to them. They never wanted to take you out of the game and make you just sit and watch something. And so they needed to use every trick they could think of to get you as much of the story and lore as possible without having to do that. Now, with the audio logs in particular, Ken Levine talks about it as being an opt-in story thing. He wanted to have all this deep lore because he talks about there's like multiple levels that he's trying to cater to, right? Like, they would focus test this game, and there'd be people like, why isn't it like Madden or Halo, right? Which sounds ridiculous, but this is what happens, right? Commercial game development. And so you're trying to cater to those players that just aren't going to think about anything other than the action. You got to give them the action, and they don't want to be bogged down with long, indulgent stuff, right? But you also have to cater to the super hardcore people. Levine compares them to um, people that listen to this is of course dating himself, a Nirvana album and like writing down all the lyrics in a notepad because they're just so into it, right? He talks about you do have to also cater to them because those players, they're smaller in number, but they're like your word of mouth, your free advertising. They're the passionate fan base that really sustains you long term. And so the audio logs are really kind of for them. They're like an opt-in. Like you can pick them up, but you don't actually have to listen to them. But your super fans will. And by the way, I'm definitely one of those people. I'll listen to every audio log. I'll read every email in Death Stranding. I will look at every single thing I get in games. So I'm definitely one of those people. All right, so here's just a few assorted mise en scènes here. And let me see. I think I have one more page of this. So what I want you to do is I want you to kind of look at these for a minute, or for a moment here, and then I'm going to show you the next, slide, and then I'm going to ask you what story elements are you getting out of this. So just take a moment and look at these. All right, I'm going to go to the next one, and I can go back if I have to. So, all right, here's the next page. All right, so as you look at these, what kinds of things, what story elements are you pulling out of these pictures? Yeah, Peter. Yeah, you definitely get that sense. So Fallen Utopia, other things from these mise en scènes that you can extract. Yeah, yeah, I think so. And let's take a look at this one here, right? Like, by the way, I know this is kind of out of context for you a little bit. So Andrew Ryan runs this place, right? So you say Ryan doesn't own us, right? So, and Rapture is the name of the place. So um, when we look at these signs, obviously people are not happy with him. Okay, other things that you might get out of these scenes. Particularly if you look at, because this is another thing that people make fun of now, but it's like so effective. Take a look at the writing in blood. Okay, Steinman kills. Adam denies us any excuse for not being beautiful. Adam is the things that let you do genetic modifications. This weird looking picture that signed J. Steinman in blood on the bottom. What are these messages trying to convey narratively, you think? And actually, let me make sure I'm not missing WebEx chat. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely been some death. Um, and of course, here, I mean, we actually have it like spelled out. This is probably the sort of thing that people chuckle at, right? In retrospect, like being that on the nose. But then again, remember those sort of layers that they're working towards, right? If you're not paying super close attention, you need the Steinman kills, message as opposed to some of these more obscure ones. So um, I know these are probably a little tricky to pull out of context, but like I'll kind of explain some of these mise en scènes here. So I think you got it in that. Yeah, there was problems happening even before everything completely went to pot, right? I mean, just to give you a little background, you see this one here. This is Andrew Ryan, and it says "No gods or kings, only man." So this game is based on the objectivist sort of philosophy that would have been being developed and becoming popular at the time Rapture was actually happening in this sort of fictional history. But objectivism isn't real philosophy, right? It's sort of this the individual, very limited or no government, super hyper capitalist, whatever. That's it's really based on Ayn Rand. That's Andrew Ryan. It's just a riff on that real person, and so this is the entryway of Rapture, and Rapture is supposed to be this objectivist utopia, and that's kind of a Bioshock theme is ruined utopias, right? That's one of the core thematic elements of all the games. So that's what we have: uh, a ruined kind of idealistic utopia. And so when you look at this, the kind of irony they're trying to get across to you in this mise en scène is that this whole place is supposed to be built on just like absolute total freedom. But you see, Ryan doesn't own us. So what's starting to happen? He's starting to become that by which he abhors, right? He's becoming exactly the thing that he does not want to become because of the things that are happening in the game. So you're meant to kind of, for those people like me anyway, the deep divers, you look at that and go, oh, right, like something's happening, right? It gives you something to chew on there. Now, with these messages here with Steinman is a doctor, and I probably should have explained that. Actually, it might have allowed you to pull more out of these scenes. But again, first hot off the press lecture, so that's kind of what happens. So Steinman, he's a doctor and he's a plastic surgeon in particular. So what you're getting out of this, and the game makes that quite clear. Adam denies us any excuse for not being beautiful. You can see he's going out of his mind. He is a plastic surgeon that's insane. And you can even see this is a portrait, and you can see this portrait is all weird looking and it's got his name on it. So he's taking what you're supposed to get from this story wise is he's taking patients and brutally disfiguring them and because he wants to be like Picasso but with like your face. Okay, so that's what's sort of being conveyed there. Um, Okay, so let's talk about the combat scripting of Bioshock. So again, their standard enemies are relatively simple. They're just going to stand around, maybe in a pose, maybe they'll be talking, but once they see you, they just bum rush you. But the designers just do a fantastic job of utilizing the environment to really get the most out of them. And one trick they do multiple times, which is such a whammy bar thing, as I like to say, but is very effective, is they turn the lights off, right? They are not afraid to use all the tricks, right? So here's a screenshot of one of the numerous times this happens where like the lights go off in the room you're in, and then all of a sudden one enemy becomes actually somewhat dangerous because you cannot see them, right? So that's, I think, a neat trick. Use the environment to create interest in the combats. Uh, Now there is standard kind of pitched battles, though. It does happen, even though it happens less in this game than in, like, say, Bioshock Infinite, where it was much more of a conventional shooter, I think. We do have, I think, a small but very solid example early in the game that I'm going to play for you here, and then we're going to talk about it. Just as a quick note, there is like a drone that I've hacked that's fighting for me. That's one of the reasons why you hear the constant kind of electronic sounds and even more chaos because there's actually a flying drone that's also shooting at these enemies. Just thought I'd mention that. My aim is so bad. Oh, and I had to reload. So he's going to escape. But at this point, I've learned the layout, so I know he's going to reappear through that back hallway. Yeah, there you are. By the way, that laugh you heard, the ha 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 ha, that's the vending machine. That's Ken Levine. He does the vending machine voices. That is his voice, actually, just as a fun note. Okay, so let's talk about this nice, tight, I think tightly done encounter, why I like it. Okay, so it has a lot of the combat scripting fundamentals I really like. Most, not all, most of the combat is in front of the player. Now, yes, they allow enemies to sneak behind, but this is controlled. It's not chaotic. They have to go through that really small hallway to get to you. So once an enemy comes up behind you, it's probably only going to be one. And if there's more than one, they're going to be behind that other enemy in the hallway. So it's very nicely controlled. You do generally, when doing combat scripting, you want to avoid a lot of chaos, a lot of uh, taking fire from a bunch of different angles at once, right? So most of the combat right in front of you, but there is like a really interesting back hallway, and you kind of saw how I was going back and forth, right? I was overlooking the main room, and then I realized right away I was going to have to go back through that hallway and make sure to get enemies that were getting through, right? And what I really like about that layout is the way that when an enemy escapes you in that first room, it comes up behind you, right? That's a really nice setup. And so, in that one sort of insane doctor guy, when I failed to dispatch him in that main area, I had learned by that point he's just going to come up from behind, so I was kind of ready for that. So and those kind of things where you kind of learn as the player how the scenario works, that makes you feel really smart. And I, as a game designer, I really like making players feel smart, right? These aren't hard things to figure out, but if you give the player a little easy thing to figure out like that, and they do figure it out, then you feel really good as a player. You're giving the player a awesome combat position, right? You're looking over top, right? You're looking over top the main room, and even when you go through that back hallway, you're also looking down into that area as well. So you're giving the player an advantageous position. And the other thing I really like is, and this is kind of a fundamental that can be easily forgotten in 3D space, you have really good use of the z-axis here. Um, if you look, you're going to have to aim up, you're going to have to aim down. So in other words, you have reasons to move what engineers would call the view frustrum. Okay, like you have reasons to move the target reticle. You're not just shooting straight ahead. That's another combat scripting fundamental I really like, making the player look around. So you get a lot of that here, even though at least in the early portion of the game, Bioshock does tend to avoid these pitched battles. When they do one, they do it, I think, very well and very correctly. Okay, so let's talk now about just some of the lasting impacts this game has had. So, the thing about Bioshock, you have to remember, this is what's cool, of course, is I was, like 26, 27 years old, when it came out. By the way, as a side note, my first reaction to Bioshock when it was a new game was to be pretty pissed off at it. And the reason is because Metroid Prime 3 came out and at the same time, and it stole its thunder in a lot of ways. And I love Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. That's a great game. So I was actually kind of mad at it at first because all people were talking about was Bioshock, right? but it was massively impactful in 2007. It was a high watermark. It really combined technology, creativity, craft, and yes, I'm going to use that Ludo narrative term. Sorry, I actually hate jargon, but this is a bit of jargon I think I really like, so I'm going to use it. It really was an experience that I think leverages the strength of video games. There's a certain kind of storytelling and immersion they achieved in Bioshock that you cannot get in better form elsewhere, right? Like, I think when we look at games that were being made in the mid to late 90s, early 2000s, especially, you would get this if you were in CGT 105. When we think about games when they started using cinematic footage, right, when CDs were being used, so they had the space to do that, a lot of games you were getting the feeling that they would be awesome movies, but are just kind of like okay games, and maybe they would be better served as a movie. I think Bioshock is a narrative game that works best as a game, right? And I think it's all the effort they made to make sure that they were doing the storytelling integrated into the gameplay, right? All those things that we even laugh at now a little bit, those cliches, they work fantastically well here. Now, this was kind of a really great time for like game storytelling. Like, this was really, I think that we're getting into BioWare's sort of high watermarks, right? I mean, this is Knights of the Old Republic wasn't that long before this, and you had Mass Effect coming out around this time. Um, and I would say the level design techniques are so important to support what they're trying to do. Like, this game really lives or dies on its level design. So that's another thing that is really striking playing it now, is just how important that craft in particular is to this game working as well as it did. So just to compare and contrast real quick, this and Bioshock Infinite. So Bioshock Infinite, it's still an immersive sim, I would say, but it's as close to an action game as an immersive sim can possibly be, and you still call it that, right? It is far more action oriented. I mean, you still had, abilities, you still had, kind of interlocking systems, but way more stand them up, knock them down, shooting gallery type stuff, right? It plays way more Call of Duty like than the original two Bioshock games do. Both games, though, heavily use mise-en-scène, so that's something they actually have in common. And also, I would say, remember, Bioshock Infinite, it's outdoors a lot of the time, and I think that completely changes the balance of the game. I think that Bioshock benefited enormously by being in this sort of tightly controlled interior setting. Okay, so lots of games that have been influenced, I think, very, very heavily from this. By the way, one thing, I haven't talked a lot about Bioshock 2. A lot of people really like that game, but Ken Levine had very little to do with it, actually. It really was, in a lot of ways, I think Bioshock 2 is a really awesome, like, expansion pack Bioshock 1. But that's, anyway, one of the reasons why I don't talk about it a whole lot, but it is a good game. But Resident Evil 7, in Village, the first-person Resident Evils, I look at that, and of course, I don't know these people personally, but I know most game designers, they pay attention to what's out there. It kind of completes the circle. There's no question that Bioshock was influenced by Resident Evil 4. There's no question about it. And survival horror in general. That's an easy thing. They'll say this. It's definitely true. Now, what I noticed what Resident Evil 7 and Village do is they put those games in first person, and so now they have much more of an immersive sim feel to them, right? So that kind of cycles back, right? The circle's complete. If Bioshock was influenced by Resident Evil, then now Resident Evil's become, I think, influenced by Bioshock and other immersive sim games. Gone Home is massively influenced by Bioshock, and I would say games like Gone Home, the sort of walking simulator games, because first of all, Gone Home was made by people that did level design for Bioshock, so that's pretty clear. And those folks actually talk pretty openly about things they learned about, particularly in this. I know we're just about out of time, but in level layout work, there's a trick they do where they make the layout for gameplay, but the individual areas fulfill the player's expectations. So the example that the Gone Home people give is in Bioshock. If you look at that world map, it does not look like it can be any real place. But when you walk into like the doctor's office, you see a lobby, you see an operating theater. So the individual cells or components of the world are made to make sense, but the overall layout is done sort of abstractly for gameplay. I thought that was an interesting process. So obviously we have a number of immersive sim games in the Dishonored series, the Arcane's Prey, which had very little to do with the real Prey, but that's another topic. And of course, Deathloop, which is a very popular new game now. These are all immersive sims. So it's very much an active genre that continues to evolve. All right, so we're totally out of time. So look at these quotes later. They're really awesome quotes about like how to get players to care about your story and some game design thoughts. And like like some of these talk about his approach to story and trying to keep it simple but have like deeper lore there. Okay, folks, that's it for today. Thank you. What's that? I'm having no problems on PS.